All right, thanks, Mike. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name's George Zeitler. I'm a marine surveyor out of South Florida. I've got an extensive background, many years as a U.S. Coast Guard Marine inspector, 7-8 years as a class surveyor, and then I've been doing everything from recreational boats to passenger ships and other deep draft ships as a surveyor on my own. And what James asked me to cover was one of our projects a couple of years ago involved surveying military assets. In other words, the military sea lift and the MARAD Ready Reserve Fleet vessels. These are typically government-owned vessels. Some of them are in active service. Others are in laid-up status with a surge compliance timeline. And as you can imagine, these vessels are in various states of repair or disrepair, depending on what you want to call it. Basically, there are 3 different fleets managed by the Maritime Administration or the Military Sea Lift Command. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about some of the smaller government fleets, NOAA or Army Corps of Engineers, and some of those small individual agency fleets, because they have their own special services and agreements. But there are 3 programs or 3 fleets that the government manages. First one is Maritime Security. This is a relatively new fleet that is less than 20 years old. The second is Military Sea Lift Command. And then the third is the National Defense Reserve Fleet, or for those of you that are in the Virginia area or down in Texas or out in California and are familiar with the old ghost fleets, those are the National Defense Reserve Fleets. So again, these are all overseen by the Maritime Administration, federal government. The Maritime Security Program is a fleet of commercially viable military useful merchant ships. This fleet was born out of the first Gulf War, and there was a strong need for increased ro-ro capacity as well as cargo or containerized capacity in the event of a major global situation that required a strong surge. The size of this fleet is capped at 60 vessels, and it's basically call it a last resort or an in extremis fleet, because these are commercially viable. They are being used by their civilian or commercial owners and operators to carry cargo on a day-to-day basis. But in the event of a military need, they're able to quickly discharge that cargo and transfer and start bringing military cargo as needed. They're contractually obligated to provide sustainment sea lift requirements during our national emergencies. It also provides the Department of Defense access to global intermodal transportation networks for terminals, facilities, logistical management services. These are all basically force multipliers to what Military Sea Lift Command offers the U.S. government. Basically what this is a program where the U.S. government provides a retainer as an incentive to the ship owner and operator to reflag the vessel under U.S. flag and to maintain it and to make it readily available in those national emergencies. They have to be available at the request of the U.S. government. From a surveyor standpoint, these vessels are fairly straightforward with regards to surveying. They are in, as I said, continuous commercial operations, so they are compliant with the current SOLAS or international requirements. They do carry, since they're U.S. flag, the U.S. Coast Guard certification, and so they're generally well maintained, and you know, our usual survey opportunities will exist here, and it's up to the ship operators, you know, on how they want to use marine surveyors for technical support or for anything else. The one that brought me to James's attention is Military Sea Lift Command, and we spent part of 2018 and 2019 surveying more than a dozen of the military sea lift ships. These are considered part of the U.S. Navy. They all carry the USNS moniker, meaning that they are U.S. Naval Auxiliary vessels. They're unarmed, owned by the U.S. Navy, federal government, but they're operated in non-commissioned service with civilian crew, meaning they are not considered warships. They are considered naval auxiliaries, but they use a civilian crew. They're responsible for managing the replenishment and military transport for the U.S. government. And MSC provides sea lift and ocean transportation for all U.S. services and other government agencies. And these are some examples of some of the ships that we were on. And you can see they're typically what the government refers to as conros. They're a hybrid ro-ro with some container capabilities. That is usually on the top deck, above the hatches, with the internals primarily ro-ro capability. There's roughly 125 vessels. All of them are late 70s, early 80s vintage, primarily. Management of these are contracted out approximately every 3 to 5 years. The government, MARAD, comes out with a request for proposal, and various ship management companies can bid on maintaining these vessels and operating them. Some of the ones that are typically receiving quotes and or receiving management contracts: Crowley, Tote, Maersk, among some of the others. I believe APL on the West Coast has some as well. Basically, MSC has 2 fleets of them for their own: the in-service and the surge fleet. If you're familiar with Diego Garcia, which is one of the pre-staged areas for surge fleet, there is some in Beaumont. Again, New Orleans, some. They're pretty well scattered around the country. I know Charleston has a few vessels as well. In service, these vessels are sailing actively around the globe, providing government, and they can be carrying every group.
We lost your presentation, George. I don't know what happened. The presentation flipped out. Can you share again, please?
Yep. Let me. Looks like I got dropped here.
I think so.
Reshare my. Yeah. Let me reshare my desk here.
Thank you.
It's not us. It's not us.
Here we go. Okay, do you have my screen back?
All good.
All right, let me get back to the presentation then. So, all right. Apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay, so let's jump ahead here. So as I said, there are two fleets, the in-service and the surge fleet. Surge fleet activation times are supposed to be 5 to 10 days. If you were watching, following G Captain and some of the other maritime websites and stuff, about 2 years ago, just prior to the pandemic, MARAD and Military Sea Lift had an activation exercise where they tried to deploy every vessel in the surge fleet and the ready reserve surge fleet in their 5 or 10 day windows, and only 60% of the fleet made it. So these vessels are old, they are minimally manned, and there's a lot of issues, and I'll highlight some of those. Currently, and I believe it's Crowley that has the contract, but there is a contract out to replace up to 138 of these vessels with newer versions. So most likely vessels that are built in the early 2000s and are at that 20-year time frame. So what are the unique challenges with these vessels? First off, scheduling and access. The picture on the left was taken in Newport News, and that is a muddy open field with some rickety wooden and concrete docks. There were 6 or 7 vessels that are tied up there, immediately adjacent to a large active coal transfer facility. And this is a secure facility, and we had to submit access paperwork weeks in advance in order to get approved for attending the vessels. So that can be a bit of a headache, is jumping through the security hurdles just to get onto the facility. Maintenance, as I mentioned, is a major headache, and I'll show you some pictures here in a minute on why that happens. I just mentioned crew size, and we'll talk about that briefly. You've got some issues with voluntary compliance versus U.S. Navy requirements. Again, these are government-owned vessels. They are not, as government-owned, they are exempt from much of the U.S. CFRs with regards to compliance, as well as SOLAS and the other IMO regulatory schemes. So therefore, these vessels they do carry all of the certificates, but they all note at the top that it's voluntary compliance. On top of that, we'll show some examples of some things that the U.S. Navy, because they operate with the Navy fleets, they fall under Navy inspection and Navy policies and procedures as well. So there's some odd things there that can trip you up. We'll talk about modifications. The picture on the right here is a prime example. They added a huge aft berthing area behind the main accommodation space for this conroe, and then they just to top it off threw a helicopter landing deck on top of that. So you get some very weird modifications to make them serviceable and usable in theater. Of course, these vessels were early 80s. They're now 40 plus years old. Aging and outdated equipment is a big issue. Maintenance, and these are just some very basic photos of some of the stuff we were seeing on board. There is no crew on board. 10, maybe 12 people for a caretaker crew. And then everything else is done via vendor contracts. So there is almost no day-to-day preventative maintenance being carried out. So things like, as you can see in the top right, cables and sheaves for cargo handling gear, for lifeboats and things like that are just in really poor condition. Watertight integrity suffers. Corrosion is evident throughout. It's just a major headache. We averaged over a 2-day survey, we would average somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 findings per vessel. During activation, these boats were going to have standard crew as far as the civilian crew, but they also will carry Navy or Marine operations personnel. You can think logistics support personnel. You'll have security teams on board, possibly with weapons, and then other forward operating personnel to assist with setting up forward bases and things like that, and organizing the discharge zones. So that creates a little bit of a headache because, again, these ships now have all sorts of new accommodation spaces for as many as 50 to 100 Navy crew. And you know, are some of the simple questions that we kept running into is, do they comply with means of escape signages and things like that that are just not well thought out at times. Also, because they are naval assets, you're going to have some sensitive spaces with communication equipment and other secret that can't survey. So how do you manage that? How do you document those areas? Can be a bit of a headache. During surge, the active vessels, they're going to be fully manned, and as I said, our surge vessels that are in layup status, typically 10 to 12 total persons, 2 to 3 deck officers. One is the captain, one is a mate. You might have a captain and a mate and a third officer. Similarly, you'll have a chief engineer, maybe a second and a third. You've got a couple of deck and a couple of engine ratings, and then 1 or 2 stewards to feed them. They're typically rigged. Only one person stays on board overnight, and that rotates amongst typically the various officers to maintain a live watch in the event of flooding or fire. But that's it. So the crew shows up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and somewhere between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're done for the day and they're heading home to their houses and their families. You can see this bottom left picture. This is fire main piping. You can see on the bottom right here, our cargo securing gear is heavily worn and wasted. Just lots of corrosion everywhere. I mentioned voluntary compliance and the fact that they're government owned. They're not required to comply with SOLAS or federal inspection standards. So quite often these vessels are missing retrofit systems. We found a couple of the ships had not been upgraded to the localized sprinkler systems over the oil-fired equipment. Or they also had problems where their CO2 total flooding for the engine room was the controls were not located under one cover as required by SOLAS. So, you know, those types of things you're going to come across. And of course, having a bare minimum budget, chances are those things are going to get put off until extra money can be found, or they may not be brought into compliance at all. Similarly, U.S. Navy requirements, can't have a fire locker. Everything is a damage control locker. We had that. Their requirements on locating and separating them are different from what SOLAS would require. The equipment that is required to be in there differs from SOLAS. There's some additional equipment, different quantities that are required by the Navy. So it can be a bit of a headache to dig through some of those things. Sound powered telephones throughout the ship. on radios alone. They have to have and sound powered phones were retrofitted for many of these. So those are some of the areas that you start finding headaches with. Modifications. I'll point out that the 4 of these 4 pictures here, the one with, except the one with the helicopter deck, that is a 1962, 1963 single hull tanker. It was out in Sushin Bay in California, and she was one of the Ready Reserve Fleet boats, and was modified. That drum you see, that wheel, contains 4 miles of oil hose. It had a sled that would slide off and could be used as a it was a pumping station that would be flooded, sunk on the bottom, and this was used to as basically a floating gas station to pump oil, primarily diesel, jet fuel, and stuff like that, to a beachhead. Just crazy stuff. This here is the single point mooring sled for the pumps and for connecting the hoses. We had these small pusher barges, self-propelled barges, for maneuvering the hoses and stuff all along. Just just crazy, and just you see all these unique things that you have to kind of figure out on the fly how to deal with. The addition of the helicopter landing decks and corrosion under those. Cargo securing. We found many ships where the cargo securing manual didn't match the actual tie down locations for the that were installed on the decking. So manuals and documentation, we found quite often, were not necessarily being maintained up to date. The final fleet that I'm going to talk about is the strategic sea lift fleet that is maintained by MARAD. These are the ones you see them in various ports. They're painted gray. They have the red, white, and blue stripes on the top of the funnel. There's approximately 100 of them, and they've been slowly culling these out. The older ones have been sent to the scrapyard. In fact, that tanker that I just showed you was scrapped late last year. Basically, 40 of the vessels are kept in a ready reserve fleet status on 5 or 10 day readiness, and then the rest are going to take typically 30 to 45 days for activation in an ideal situation. One of the dilemmas some of these older vessels face is that they are steam powered, and I don't know about you, but I don't come across too many young steam engineers. So that's a little bit of a headache, and is one of the reasons why they're in the process of renovating this fleet. Okay, again, these are some of the we face some of the same challenges with this ready reserve fleet. Again, this is that 1960 steam powered tanker, and we had no automation. We still had a head and a stern, main steam valves, steam turbines. Definitely don't comply with standards since she was single hull. Again, altered arrangements, severely outdated equipment. And these boats, because these are now the ghost fleets, if you will, that are anchored out, they actually have 0 crew on board. They have caretakers that come on and do periodic inspections, or if they're due for some sort of maintenance or something failed, they will bring vendors out to do some work. But there's nobody on these maintaining them, so activation is much more difficult. So how do you get involved with this? Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the work that we were doing was coming through the ship managers that had the government contract. But there is also some work that comes through straight out of government purchasing through that MARAD or MSC will issue directly from Washington. And in order to get onto that, typically you have to get entered into the government's vendor program. If I remember correctly, the last time I saw it, it was the acronym was SAMS, and or SAM, and but there you're bidding. You'll get a notification. You register into the types of services that you're able to provide, and they will send out when they issue a request for quotation. They will send out a notice via email that you can go in, look at what the actual RFQ is asking for, what work is to be done, what are the requirements and everything else, and then you submit your bid. That being said, as with most government contracts, it's there's a tiered level for the bids, and they're looking at they're theoretically price conscious, and so they're looking for the lowest qualifying bid so that they can save money. So lack of funding is a big issue for all of these. One of the vessels that we were involved with had been in dry dock was in there for initially for 3 months, came out, and as they were they had wanted to do some crane work, didn't have the money to do it. As they were coming out of the shipyard, they realized that the unloading cranes were the slewing gear was so worn that the cranes were actually rocking, and had to go back in. It was in for another 4 or 5 months to do the repairs on the cranes, and they had to start tracking down something in the neighborhood of $10 million, which they did by taking it from other vessels in the ready reserve fleet, and then telling those ship managers that you're going to have to do with less. So these are all some of the headaches that we tend to find dealing with these vessels. Any questions?
George, how big's your crew when you go?
Normally, for doing these ships, we typically go on with 2 surveyors. Call it an old habit, but coming up in the Coast Guard, we almost never did anything by ourselves for safety primarily, but also it as a way to provide on-site support, so that if somebody came across something that they were not 100% sure how to deal with, they could actually talk amongst each other on site and do that. So we've tried to maintain that. I have a partner who is also a Coast Guard inspector and a class surveyor, and it's just the 2 of us. So that, we try and do as much stuff in teams as possible.
George, who does the degassing?
I'm sorry, Randy, I could just barely hear you.
Who performed the degassing?
Who performed what?
Degassing, ventilating the hulls prior to your inspection.
All I could hear is something about who performed what of the hull.
Ventilation of your hull, ventilation.
Oh, ventilation of the spaces. We did not go into any tanks when we did these surveys because there were at the dock. There was insufficient crew to open compartments up. So therefore, the captain on board said, no, we're not, I don't have the crew to open and close those, so we're not going to do it. So we weren't able to enter any of the spaces. On ships in service, we typically go through the ship's confined space entry protocol. And so if that's the chief mate opening, venting, and doing the testing, we'll follow that. Obviously in shipyards, it's a little bit different. We'll use the shipyard competent person or the gas-free engine, the gas-free chemist, if they're coming in to do the marine chemist is doing the spaces. But we do also carry 4 gas meters with us on our own. One thing I forgot to mention, or I started to mention briefly, is photographs. For us, we are strong believers that a picture is worth 1,000 words, with the caveat that a bad picture takes 10,000 words to explain. But the more we can document digitally and show people, the more success we've had in getting movement and compliance and getting work accomplished. That being said, because some of these are on secure facilities, I've had security guards come running down and trying to confiscate my camera for walking down the dock and taking photos on the side of the vessel. We've had situations on board when they were carrying military tanks and other equipment, where down in the cargo holds we weren't allowed to photograph, so that we couldn't make sure, that way we could make sure that there was no indication of which troops were on board when, and for obvious national security reasons. But that creates a bit of a headache, because it causes us to have to document things in a manner different from our standard practices. But it's something to keep in mind as well.
Are you required to have a TWIC badge or DVIDs to get access to some of the vessels?
Most of the time, our TWIC has been sufficient. Both of us being retired military, our military IDs are able to support the TWIC, but we've been able to get by with just the TWIC for most everything. It just takes time. Any other questions? If not, I think Randy, you had one other thing that you had put on there, and it's I'll call it a soapbox of mine. One of my other avenues of income at the moment is I teach entry-level marine surveying at Chapman School of Seamanship down here in Florida. And over the last couple of years doing this, one of the things that's cropped up is the issue of assisting and mentoring young surveyors. And I'll use the term young to mean inexperienced. And it's an area that I think as an industry, we need to keep an open mind to. I know, Mike, I think you mentioned early on about the fact that as an industry, we're not getting any younger, and trying to pass our knowledge on becomes more important. And I think it helps to solidify and to strengthen the marine surveying industry. It makes us more reliable, makes us more competent, and when we say something, it carries a little more weight. And the last thing we need is surveyors that are not up to snuff, whether they're accredited or otherwise recognized or not, it's very easy for someone to bring the industry's reputation into question, and more importantly, the value of the services that we provide. And so, and I try to encourage, and I try to practice it myself, is to provide advice and mentoring to anyone that asks me. It doesn't cost me anything to talk to someone about an experience or about how I might handle a situation and provide some guidance there. I've heard many surveyors argue that, why do I want to train someone who is going to just steal business from me? I think the last 2.5 years here in the US has shown that there's more work out there than most of us could reasonably do. And if we're booking 4, 6, 8 weeks out, then chances are we're missing a bunch of work that we could actually be funneling to a colleague. So, I would just encourage you as a surveyor, if a young surveyor approaches you, please consider sharing your opportunities. Let them shadow along with them. Every student that comes into my classroom, I tell them, hey, offer to carry the bag, offer to buy coffee, buy lunch, whatever you need to do. But the more often that you can go, that they can shadow along with you, the better they are, the quicker they're going to get up to speed. So, and with
I think
that,
you make a really, really important point, actually, George, and it's something that's dear to my heart. I mean, we've been banging on about this for some time, and we keep looking at how to formalize a mentoring scheme within our IRMS. And I think we are quite close to doing that. We've got a board meeting in September, and it's on the agenda there. And I think you're absolutely right. There is plenty of work to go around for good quality marine surveyors. I'm sure that's true in America as it is in the UK and certainly in Europe. And it's most unlikely that they're going to go and pinch all your clients locally. I think there's plenty of work out there to be had. But the industry does have, I think, a really big problem if we don't encourage more people in. I think a lot of it's a generational thing. I think a lot of younger people these days don't want to work on a Sunday at 3 in.the morning when it's pouring with rain because a ship's coming into port. They just don't want to do that stuff. In fact, I was talking to a surveyor who employed a young guy who he was training and teaching, and the guy said, I don't work Saturdays and Sundays. And he said, you do if you're a marine surveyor. That's the way it is. That's the life you're choosing. So it's an attitudinal thing by youngsters as well, how we make this industry and profession more attractive to those people. I don't have an easy solution for that, but I think mentoring is a really hot topic at the moment.
I've had students come in that have called 6 or 8 surveyors in their local area and got very poor responses, were brushed off and otherwise meant to feel like they were not wanted, and consequently seriously questioned whether or not this business was for them. And it's a shame that we're the words of a few are dashing the potential of others, and it just doesn't, in my mind, it just doesn't compute, and we really need to do it. I have students that reach out to me weekly. I've got a couple that every 3 months I get an email on everything they've been doing, and it, they just want to talk. They want to get some validation, and it can be as easy as providing that support or providing them with pointers on where they can go and do the research that they need to do to find an answer. But realistically, in my mind, mentoring is not something that is difficult to do, and it's a whole lot easier than me standing up in front of a classroom and trying to teach 16 or 18 students at a time, because giving one-on-one is a lot better.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And support your ambition in that area. George, thank you very much. Let me kill the record.